Here's something nobody talks about. The moment you admit you don't like being around children, the room goes silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence, the judging kind. The kind that makes people wonder if something fundamental is broken inside you. Because in a world that treats adoration of children as a moral baseline, indifference, or worse, discomfort, feels like confessing to a crime you didn't know you committed. But here's the thing. That discomfort you feel around kids, that instinctive withdrawal when a toddler screams in a restaurant, or that internal resistance when someone assumes you'll find their child fascinating, it's not a defect, it's not cruelty, and it's definitely not as rare as the silence around it suggests. What you're about to understand today changes completely the way you see this part of yourself, because what most people interpret as coldness is actually a specific configuration of psychological priorities, sensory thresholds, and value systems that science is only beginning to map with precision, and once you see the architecture underneath, you stop apologizing for who you are. Let's start by clearing something up. Not liking kids doesn't mean you want them to suffer. It doesn't mean you'd be cruel to a child. It doesn't mean you lack empathy or warmth or the capacity for love. These are the assumptions people make because we live in a culture that equates affection for children with goodness itself. But that equation is false. You can respect a child's right to exist, to be protected, to thrive, and still find their presence exhausting. You can recognize that children are vulnerable and deserving of care, and still have no desire to be the one providing it. You can believe parents deserve support, and still feel nothing when a baby smiles at you. This isn't hypocrisy, it's specificity, and specificity is what most people can't tolerate because it requires them to accept that not everyone is wired the same way. So let's be very clear, if you don't light up around children, if you find their energy draining rather than delightful, if you'd rather be anywhere else when a kid enters the room, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your nervous system, your reward circuitry, and your psychological needs are calibrated differently. And that's not a bug. It's just a different operating system. Now, let's talk about why this happens. Because there's real science here, and it's far more interesting than the moral panic people project onto you. The human brain is designed to find certain stimuli rewarding. Babies with their large eyes, round faces, and high-pitched sounds trigger what's called the baby schema, a hardwired response that floods the brain with oxytocin and dopamine. For many people, this response is automatic. They see a baby, and their brain lights up like a reward center just got activated. They feel warmth, they feel protective, they feel drawn in. But here's what nobody tells you. That response isn't universal. Neurological research shows that some people simply don't experience the same dopamine surge when exposed to infant stimuli. Their brains don't interpret the baby schema as rewarding. And this isn't pathology, it's variation. Just like some people don't enjoy music or don't find sweet foods appealing, some nervous systems don't register children as a positive stimulus. This is where it gets interesting. The absence of that reward response doesn't mean your brain is unresponsive. It means it's selectively responsive. Your dopamine system still works. It just prioritizes different inputs. Maybe it lights up for intellectual challenge, maybe for solitude, maybe for creative flow, or deep conversation, or the quiet satisfaction of a completed task. Your brain isn't broken. It's just rewarding you for different things. And if you've ever felt like you're supposed to feel something you don't, if you've ever faked enthusiasm around a friend's baby because the alternative felt socially unacceptable, you already know this. You've already experienced the gap between what your nervous system actually responds to and what culture tells you it should. Now, here's the part that makes this content different from anything else you'll find on YouTube. Most channels talk about psychology. This channel talks to people who experience the world through a specific psychological lens. People who notice patterns others miss. People who think in systems, not slogans. People who've realized that mainstream advice doesn't apply to them because it wasn't written for how their minds actually work. If that's you, If you've spent your life feeling slightly out of sync with what everyone else seems to naturally understand, then you're in the right place, because everything we explore here is built for people who operate outside the average. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. Not because I'm asking for a favor, but because you'll actually use this. Let's go deeper, because the dopamine explanation is just the surface. Underneath, there's something more complex happening, a difference in how your brain processes unpredictability. Children are by nature chaotic. Their behavior is erratic. Their needs are immediate and non-negotiable. Their emotional states shift without warning. For some people, this unpredictability is charming. It feels spontaneous, alive, full of possibility. But for others, especially people with nervous systems that prioritize control, order, and predictability, that same chaos registers as threat. Neuroscience calls this intolerance of uncertainty. It's not a disorder. It's a cognitive style. People high in this trait feel discomfort when they can't predict outcomes, when variables are uncontrolled, when the environment resists structure. And children, by their very nature, resist structure. They don't follow logic. They don't respect plans. They don't care about your need for quiet, or focus, or personal space. So when you feel that instinctive resistance around kids, what you're actually feeling is your nervous system signaling. This environment is unpredictable. This environment requires constant adaptation. This environment will not allow you to operate the way you need to operate. And here's the kicker. That's a completely rational response. Because if your brain is wired to function best in environments where you can think deeply, plan ahead, and control variables, then yes, being around children is objectively more taxing for you than it is for someone whose brain finds chaos energizing. This isn't about being rigid or cold. It's about recognizing that your cognitive resources are finite and that certain environments deplete them faster than others. For you, children aren't just neutral. They're actively costly, and your brain knows it. Now let's talk about two very different psychological profiles. Not better or worse, just different. Profile 1. The people who find children energizing. These are individuals whose reward systems light up in response to caregiving behaviors. They feel dopamine when a child laughs. They feel oxytocin when a baby grabs their finger. Their nervous systems interpret the dependency of children as an opportunity for bonding, for purpose, for meaning. For them, the unpredictability isn't draining, it's stimulating. The lack of structure isn't chaos. It's freedom from adult rigidity. They see a child and think, here is someone who needs me. Here is someone I can shape. Here is someone who will love me unconditionally. Profile 2. You. People whose reward systems activate in response to autonomy, mastery, and intellectual depth. You feel dopamine when you solve a problem, when you create something, when you experience flow in work that matters to you. Your nervous system interprets dependency not as bonding, but as burden, not because you're selfish, but because your brain is structured to find meaning in self-directed achievement, not in service to someone else's unformed needs. You see a child and think, here is someone who will demand my attention without offering the kind of exchange I value. Here is someone I cannot reason with. Here is someone whose presence will prevent me from being who I actually am. Neither profile is wrong, but only one gets socially punished, and that's because we live in a world that treats the caregiving impulse as synonymous with virtue, which means if you don't have it, you must be lacking something essential. But you're not. You're just wired for a different kind of contribution. Let's talk about empathy, because this is where people get it wrong. Empathy isn't a monolith. It's not a single capacity you either have or don't have. It's a spectrum of responses that get allocated differently depending on what your brain considers relevant. Some people have high, affective empathy. They feel what others feel, especially if those others are vulnerable, innocent, or dependent. They see a crying child and they feel that distress in their own body. Their mirror neurons fire, their heart rate sinks. They're physiologically compelled to soothe. Other people, maybe you, have high cognitive empathy. You can understand what someone is feeling without necessarily feeling it yourself. You can recognize that a child is upset without being flooded by their distress. You can acknowledge someone's needs without feeling personally responsible for meeting them. This isn't coldness, it's boundaries. And boundaries are what allow you to function without being overwhelmed by every emotional signal in your environment. But here's what culture doesn't tell you. Cognitive empathy is just as valuable as effective empathy. Maybe more so, because cognitive empathy allows you to help people without losing yourself in their emotions. It allows you to think clearly in crisis. It allows you to make decisions based on what's actually best, not just what feels emotionally immediate. So when someone accuses you of being unfeeling because you don't melt around children, what they're really saying is, your empathy doesn't look like mine, so I'm going to interpret it as absence. But it's not absence, it's just a different allocation. You're not withholding care from children. You're directing your care toward different targets. Maybe adults who can articulate their needs. Maybe ideas that can change systems. Maybe creative work that will outlast any single relationship. And that's not less important. It's just less visible. Now let's talk about where this comes from. Because nothing about your psyche is random. Everything has a history. For some people, discomfort around children is rooted in their own childhood. Maybe you were parentified, forced to take care of younger siblings when you should have been playing. Maybe you were overstimulated, raised in a chaotic environment where noise and demands never stopped. Maybe you were hyper-aware, the kind of kid who noticed everything, who couldn't tune out the world, who felt every loud sound and every emotional shift like a physical assault. If that was you, then your brain learned early. Children equal overwhelm. Children equal loss of self. Children equal a demand you cannot refuse. And even if you're an adult now, even if you have autonomy and choice, that early conditioning doesn't just disappear. Your nervous system still remembers. It still braces. It still withdraws as a form of protection. But here's the important part. That withdrawal isn't a failure. It's an adaptation. It's your brain doing exactly what it's supposed to do, protecting you from an environment it has learned to associate with depletion. For others, it's not about trauma. It's just about temperament. You were born with a nervous system that craves quiet, depth, and control. You were the kid who played alone, who read instead of running, who preferred one close friend to a chaotic playgroup. And children, with their noise and needs and relentless energy, were always too much for you. Not because you were damaged, but because you were built differently, and that's fine. More than fine. Because the world needs people who can think deeply, who can create without distraction, who can operate in silence and stillness and singular focus. The world needs people like you. It just doesn't always know how to say it. Let's talk about meaning. Because this is where the real divide happens. For many people, meaning comes from narrative, from being part of a story larger than themselves, from watching a child grow, from shaping a life, from leaving a legacy in the form of another human being. For them, children represent continuity. They represent the future. They represent proof that their existence mattered. But for you, meaning might come from creation, from making something that didn't exist before, from solving a problem no one else could solve, from contributing an idea, a work, a system that changes how people think. For you, legacy isn't biological. It's intellectual. It's creative. It's the trace you leave in culture, not in genetics. And here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Both are valid. Both matter. Both contribute to the future, but only one gets called selfish. Why? Because reproduction is visible. It's tangible. It's something everyone can understand. But the work you do, the thinking, the creating, the building, that's often invisible until it's done. And by then, people have already judged you for not doing the thing they think everyone should do, but you're not refusing to contribute. You're just contributing differently. And the people who can't see that, they're not looking for your contribution. They're looking for you to mirror theirs. Let's talk about flow. because this is where everything comes together. Flow is that state where you lose track of time, where your sense of self dissolves, where you're completely absorbed in what you're doing. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying it, and one of his key findings is this: flow requires a balance between challenge and skill. It requires clear goals. It requires immediate feedback. And it requires an environment where you can focus without interruption. Children disrupt all of that. They interrupt focus. They create noise. They demand attention at random intervals. They prevent you from entering the psychological state where your brain works best. And for some people, that's fine. Their flow comes from caregiving itself, from responding, from adapting, from being needed. But for you, flow comes from a different place, from deep work, from uninterrupted thought, from the satisfaction of building something complex over time. And when you're around children, you can't access that state. You're too busy managing chaos. You're too busy being interrupted. You're too busy existing in someone else's rhythm instead of your own. So when you avoid children, you're not being cold. You're protecting your access to the state where you feel most alive. And that's not selfish. That's self-awareness. Here's what I want you to understand. You're not broken. You're not missing something. You're not cold or cruel or deficient in some essential human quality. You're just wired to find meaning, connection, and reward in different places than the people who keep telling you that loving children is the measure of a good person. Your brain doesn't light up for dependency. It lights up for autonomy. It doesn't crave chaos. It craves order. It doesn't find purpose in shaping a life. It finds purpose in shaping an idea, a system, a work that will outlast you. And that's not a lesser way to exist. It's just a different one. The world needs people who can sit with a child and feel nothing but patience and warmth, but it also needs people who can sit in silence and think thoughts no one else has thought. It needs people who can build things that take years to complete. It needs people who can hold focus in a world designed to destroy it. It needs you, exactly as you are. So stop apologizing. Stop pretending. Stop forcing yourself to perform an affection you don't feel just to avoid the judgment of people who can't imagine a mind that works differently than theirs. You don't owe anyone that performance. You owe yourself the honesty of living in alignment with how you're actually built. And if you want more of this, if you want to keep exploring the psychology of people who think in systems, who live outside the average, who've realized that most advice wasn't written for them, then watch this next. Why highly intelligent people struggle with happiness. Because the same wiring that makes you uncomfortable around children is probably the same wiring that makes you uncomfortable in a world built for someone else. You're not alone. You're just specific. And that's exactly what makes you valuable.